Hey everyone, buckle up because today we're diving into a topic that's seriously mind-bending. We're going to be talking about memories of the future.
Oh, wow, okay. So are we talking time travel?
Not exactly. It's more about the idea that maybe, just maybe, it's possible to have experiences or glimpses of things that haven't happened yet.
Interesting. I'm curious to hear more about this.
Yeah, we'll be exploring this through an essay called True Ghost Story by Timothy Kreider. Now, the title might throw you off a bit, but it's not your typical ghost story.
I was just thinking that true ghost story sounds a bit paradoxical.
Right, and that's part of what makes it so fascinating. Kreider weaves together these personal anecdotes about possibly paranormal experiences with these deep reflections on time, perception, and what we even consider to be real.
So it's like he's using these spooky encounters to delve into some pretty big philosophical questions.
You got it. And one of the central stories in the essay revolves around this eerie phenomenon that keeps happening in his family. His mother repeatedly hears this mysterious music in their old farmhouse.
Mysterious music? Like what kind of music?
It's described as piano music, but the details about the melody or style aren't really the focus. It's more about the fact that it appears out of nowhere and no one else can hear it except his mom.
Spooky. So is she convinced the house is haunted?
It definitely seems that way. And what's even more intriguing is that as she gets older, she starts experiencing time differently. She mixes up generations, confuses past memories with the present, and even starts to question if it's possible to have memories of the future. Like maybe she's somehow tapping into events that haven't happened yet.
Whoa, that's a wild concept. But I guess when you think about how relative time can be, maybe those boundaries between past, present, and future are more fluid than we realize.
Exactly. She even quotes Einstein saying past, present, and future are only a stubbornly persistent illusion. And this brings us to another fascinating element of the essay, the setting where much of this unfolds, a retirement home.
A retirement home. So we're going from a potentially haunted farmhouse to a retirement home.
You got it. And Kreider describes the retirement home as a place where the lines between reality and perception become incredibly blurry.
I can see how that environment might amplify these feelings of time shifting and memories blurring together.
Absolutely. The residents are dealing with declining health, memory loss, and a general sense of disorientation. And the author's mother, living in this environment, starts having these experiences that really challenge his own perception of what's real.
Okay, like what kind of experiences?
Well, she starts seeing people who aren't there. She confuses past memories with present events. It's like she's tapping into a different layer of reality, one that's less defined, more open to these unexpected occurrences.
So she's having visual hallucinations.
It seems that way. And the author, despite being a self-proclaimed skeptic, finds himself navigating this uncertain terrain with his mother. There's this one anecdote where he puts out a plate of pizza for a guest that only his mother can see.
Wow. So he's engaging with her reality even though it doesn't align with his own understanding of the world?
Exactly. It's like he's choosing to participate in her experience rather than dismiss it as simply a sign of cognitive decline. And then there's this chilling moment that throws another wrench into everything. The author's father, on his deathbed, suddenly mentions hearing piano music too.
Wait, hold on, the same piano music that his mother had been hearing for years?
That's the implication. And it raises this really unsettling question. Was this some kind of shared paranormal experience? Were they both privy to something beyond our normal understanding? Or is it something else entirely, a trick of the mind, a strange coincidence?
That's so eerie. It gives me chills just thinking about it. And the author even touches on that age-old belief that death is one of those times when the veil between worlds can thin, allowing for these seemingly impossible connections.
Right. It's like those boundaries between the living and the dead become more permeable. He even references Linda Berry, the cartoonist. She's observed that children playing with imaginary friends might also be tapping into something beyond our usual senses, something where those boundaries are more fluid.
Makes you wonder if, as adults, we lose that connection to something more, like our perception of reality becomes too fixed, too grounded in the material world.
And maybe it's in those liminal spaces like birth, death, or even altered states of consciousness that we get these brief glimpses back into those other realms. But there's also this fascinating back and forth that Kreider brings up between Stephen King and Stanley Kubrick. They have these totally opposite views on the purpose of ghost stories.
Oh, that's interesting. So we're moving from personal anecdotes into a discussion about ghost stories in general. I'm curious to hear their different takes.
Well, Stephen King, being the horror master that he is, actually finds ghost stories comforting. He believes they suggest that something exists beyond death, which can be a source of solace, even if that afterlife might not always be pleasant.
Makes sense coming from him. But what about Kubrick? I mean, he directed The Shining, which is a pretty terrifying exploration of the supernatural.
Exactly. And that's where the contrast gets really interesting. Kubrick, being a hardcore rationalist, questions the nature of that afterlife. He's like, if ghosts are real, does that also mean there's a hell? He doesn't see it as inherently comforting, but rather something to approach with caution, maybe even dread.
So it's not just about whether or not you believe in ghosts, but about what those beliefs imply about the nature of reality and what might lie beyond.
Right. And Kreider seems to straddle both sides of this. He acknowledges that we humans have this deep desire for something beyond the mundane, like this need to believe in the supernatural.
That makes sense. It's like we're wired to search for meaning beyond the material world, to find connections to something bigger than ourselves.
And Kreider admits that he wouldn't mind seeing proof of something extraordinary, something that would shake up his view of the world. But he also maintains this skeptical materialist viewpoint, like he's searching for that balance between wanting to believe and needing concrete evidence.
I think a lot of people can relate to that struggle. It's the tension between our rational minds and that part of us that wants to believe in the magical, the unexplainable.
It's like we're constantly trying to reconcile those two sides within ourselves. But then the essay circles back to his mother, and things take another unsettling turn. Shortly after moving into the retirement home, she starts hearing faint music again.
And is it?
You guessed it. That same mysterious piano music from the farmhouse.
Oh, wow. So is she convinced it's following her?
She actually believes it's the same music, the exact same melody. And that's where it gets really eerie, because it suggests a connection that goes beyond time and space. Like maybe the music is following her, or maybe she's somehow tuning into it, like a frequency only she can pick up on.
It's like the music has become this thread connecting different points in time, and it raises the question, is this some manifestation of something supernatural? Or is it all in her mind? Or could it even be a premonition?
The essay doesn't give us any easy answers, but it definitely leaves us with this sense of unease, this realization that there are limits to our understanding, especially when it comes to things like consciousness, perception, and what happens after we die.
And it all comes back to that question that the mother poses. Is it possible to have memories of the future? It's a question that challenges our fundamental understanding of how time works and what's even possible within the realm of human experience.
And I think that's a good place to pause for now. Next time, we'll delve deeper into the author's own interpretation of his mother's experience and explore how this idea of precognition ties into the bigger themes of time, memory, and the power of the mind to shape our reality.
So last time we left off with that image of the mother hearing the piano music again in the retirement home, the same music she thought she heard years ago back at the farmhouse.
It's a pretty chilling detail.
Yeah.
And it's that recurrence that leads her to ask the author that big question, is it even possible to have memories of the future?
A question that really gets at the heart of how we think about time, doesn't it? What's interesting is that the author doesn't just dismiss her question. He actually entertains the idea.
He does. He even says, flat out, that yes, he believes it is possible to have memories of the future. And his explanation for that belief takes us into some pretty interesting territory, the world of science fiction.
So he's looking at stories that play with our usual understanding of time as a straight line. Stories about time travel or alternate realities.
Exactly. He brings up some classic sci-fi works that explore those ideas. And he even quotes Einstein again, that whole past, present, and future are only a stubbornly persistent illusion thing. It's like he's suggesting that maybe our everyday way of thinking about time as this linear progression is too simplistic.
Maybe it's more like a swirling river or something, where moments from different times can kind of bleed into each other. It's a trippy thought, but it kind of fits with how he describes his mother's experience of time as she gets older. Constantly mixing up generations, confusing memories, like the boundaries are getting blurry.
That's such a great way to put it. The boundaries of time becoming less rigid. And remember, she's living in this retirement home where reality itself seems more fluid, more open to these shifts in perception. The author describes it as a place where the senses are unreliable, memories failing, and cognitive problems common.
Right, so in that kind of environment, it becomes even harder to tell what's real and what's not. The lines blur, and that opens up space for these strange, almost uncanny experiences.
It's like the environment itself is amplifying these experiences, making it tough to tell where perception ends and reality begins. And it creates this constant challenge for the author. How do you navigate a world where reality is so subjective. He even talks about making these ontological compromises, like putting out that plate of pizza for a guest that only his mother can see.
I keep coming back to that pizza story. It really highlights how the author chooses to engage with his mother's reality, even though it goes against his own logic. There's a deep respect for her experience, even if he doesn't fully understand it.
Yeah, it says a lot about their relationship, but it also highlights the challenges of caring for someone who's experiencing the world so differently. And for all these mind-bending concepts and philosophical explorations, the essay doesn't shy away from the human side of things either. We're talking about aging, memory loss, and the fact that death is something we all have to face.
That's an important point. It's not all just heady concepts and ghost stories. There's this underlying current of loss and grief that runs through the essay. The author is dealing with his parents' declining health, their slipping grasp on reality, and the knowledge that their time is limited.
Which brings us back to that chilling moment when his father, who's on his deathbed, mentions hearing the piano music too, that echo from beyond the realm of the living. The shared experience that defies explanation.
Which again begs the question, was it a real paranormal experience, some kind of connection to the other side? Or was it simply a trick of the mind, final hallucination before death? The essay never really answers that, and I think that ambiguity is deliberate.
I think so too. It leaves us with this unsettling feeling, this realization that there were limits to what we can know about the world, especially when it comes to things like consciousness and what happens after we die.
And it taps into our fascination with the paranormal, doesn't it? That idea that maybe there's more to reality than what we can see and touch. That death might not be the end, but a transition to something else is both intriguing and terrifying.
And even the author, as skeptical as he is, admits that he wouldn't mind seeing some proof of something extraordinary. He even says he yearns for something more than just this, as he calls it, dreary bullshit. It's like he's torn between his rational mind and this desire for something more, something that would change his whole understanding of reality.
That tension we were talking about before, wanting to believe but needing proof, it's something a lot of us can probably relate to, right? We value logic and reason, but there's this part of us that wants to believe in the magical, the unexplainable.
We're always trying to find that balance, but then the essay brings up another interesting angle, this concept of the veil thinning between worlds.
Oh yeah, that idea that at certain times, like during birth or death, maybe even around Halloween, the boundaries between realms become more permeable. It's like reality itself becomes less solid, more susceptible to influences from the other side.
And he connects this back to Linda Berry's observations about kids and their imaginary friends, suggesting that maybe children, with their imaginations, are more attuned to these other realms, more likely to pick up on things that adults just dismiss.
So as we get older, we lose some of that sensitivity to the unseen. Our focus shifts to the concrete, the tangible. But maybe in those liminal spaces, those in-between moments, we get these brief flashes of that childlike wonder again.
Like we're tuning into a different frequency, one that's usually out of range but becomes accessible when the veil is thin. And maybe the music, in this case, is a manifestation of that other frequency, a signal from a realm we can't usually perceive.
It's a beautiful and kind of unsettling image, isn't it? The music as a bridge between realms. And it circles back to that question about memories of the future. What if those boundaries between past, present, and future really are as fluid as the essay suggests? What if what we think of as memories of the future are actually glimpses into these alternate realities, echoes from another point in time?
And it all comes back to the power of the mind. The essay isn't just about ghosts and hauntings. It's about the mind's ability to create, to perceive, and maybe even to transcend our everyday reality.
It's about the mysteries of consciousness and how our perceptions shape our experience of the world. But we were also talking about that debate between Stephen King and Stanley Kubrick, those contrasting views on ghost stories. How does that fit into all of this?
Well, remember, Stephen King sees ghost stories as kind of optimistic because they hint at some kind of continuation after death. Then you have Kubrick, who brings up the possibility of hell. Like maybe that afterlife isn't necessarily something to look forward to.
They represent two very different ways of looking at the unknown, don't they? One finds comfort in the idea of something beyond death, even if it's a little scary. The other is more cautious, more concerned with the potential downsides.
It raises those big questions: what happens after we die? And should we be afraid of it or welcome it? The essay doesn't give us any clear answers, but it definitely pushes us to think about those things.
It highlights the different ways we approach these big mysteries. Some find solace in believing in an afterlife, while others grapple with the implications of what that might mean. And the author himself seems to be caught somewhere in between these two.
Right. He acknowledges that yearning for something beyond the ordinary, that human desire to believe in the magical. But he's also holding on to his skepticism, his focus on the observable world.
He's wrestling with those impulses, trying to balance his desire for wonder with his need for evidence. And even with all his skepticism, he admits he wouldn't mind seeing some proof of something extraordinary. He wishes for something more than, as he puts it, this dreary human bullshit.
That really resonates with me. We might not believe in ghosts or the supernatural literally, but there's this part of us that wants to be proven wrong. We long for something that would expand our understanding of what's possible.
It's that sense of wonder that keeps us searching, exploring, and using our imaginations. But I think there's still more to this. The author mentions that ghost stories are more about evoking a feeling than conveying information.
That's right, he does. What's he getting at there? How does that connect to his own experience with this mysterious music and his mother's belief in memories of the future?
That's exactly where we'll pick up next time. We'll dive into the emotional power of ghost stories and the enduring mystery of the human mind.
Okay, so we were talking about how the author compares ghost stories to jokes. How they're both more about creating a feeling than conveying information.
Right, and he says it so well. You don't tell a ghost story to teach someone a lesson. You tell it to give them chills, to creep them out.
Yeah, it's about eliciting that visceral response, like a jump scare in a movie or that feeling of like a cold breath on the back of your neck.
It's funny because he contrasts it with his own work as an essayist. He says he feels bound by the drab materials of fact, and he jokes that he'd much rather be writing sci-fi or fantasy.
He even admits that he could have written a more sentimental version of this essay, like one where he ends up hearing the music too, and it becomes this shared paranormal experience with his mother and father.
Oh, I see. So it would tie everything up neatly, but it wouldn't be true to his experience.
Right. He says he can't hear the music because he's not suffering from auditory hallucinations.
I like his honesty, though. It's refreshing. He's not trying to convince us of anything. He's just sharing his process, you know? His observations and how he's wrestling with these big questions about reality and what we can even know for sure.
And it's interesting because amidst all that, he touches on something really profound, death, and how we as humans grapple with that knowledge.
So he's saying that all these spooky stories, all this talk of ghosts and hauntings, might be a way of avoiding a deeper, more unsettling truth.
Maybe. There's this really powerful line in the essay. The ghost in every ghost story is you.
Whoa. Okay, so what's he getting at there?
He's saying that humans have a unique form of precognition, the foreknowledge of our own mortality. We know deep down that we're going to die.
It's that awareness that our bodies will eventually fail, our senses will fade, and we won't exist anymore.
We try to laugh about it, make jokes, dress up in costumes. But maybe, deep down, we're running from the real monster.
Our own mortality, the ghost we can never outrun.
Exactly. It's a bit of a bleak thought, isn't it?
Yeah, it's heavy stuff.
But you know, there's also something kind of comforting about it, too.
Comforting? How so?
Because it's universal. It's a shared experience. Every single one of us is going to face this. And recognizing that can maybe help us appreciate being alive right now, in this moment.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's about finding a way to live with that knowledge, to embrace the present moment even more fully, because we know it's finite.
And that's what I find so amazing about this essay. It starts with these seemingly paranormal events, but it leads us to the very heart of the human experience.
The mysteries of consciousness, the power of the mind, the big questions about life and death.
So where do we go from here? The essay leaves us with a lot to think about. Is it possible to have memories of the future? Are there forces at work that we don't understand, shaping our lives in ways we can't even grasp? Can we trust our senses? Or are they just creating an illusion of a solid, knowable world?
These are questions that humans have been grappling with for as long as we've been around. And this essay encourages us to keep asking them, to keep exploring those mysteries.
And maybe, just maybe, if we pay close enough attention, if we learn to listen a little more closely, we might start to hear the echoes of something truly extraordinary, something beyond our everyday perception.
Something that tells us there's more to this reality than we currently understand.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the echoes of this deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this journey.